Well, hello. Welcome to this tutorial for the image that you can see on your screens at the moment, the sort of Shinhanga style print. I'll be talking you through some of the steps to get to this point in the process. But it's a combination of traditional and digital materials, so we'll be taking a look at both of those. I have done some fairly primitive recording of the practical elements. The digital elements, you're in slightly safer hands thanks to screen capture technology. But what you're about to see is actually quite shocking. It's terrible webcam footage of my sketching process. In case you're interested, this was achieved by sellotaping a webcam to the bill of a sailor's cap that I keep around the studio just for a bit of fun. And so you can see that there's nothing particularly impressive or unusual about what I'm doing here that requires much explanation. It's basically just sketching out the details. I'm not using any perspective grids or anything at the moment, just a little bit of reference from my books of Shinhanga prints. And this is me just sketching out the very rough composition of what I want before I start approaching it in more detail. But I'm not alone in the commentary box here today. I've got my partner, the delightful Zanfi, with me just to stop me from kind of going off the deep end with talking on my own for an hour.
That was never part of the contract.
No, no, that's true. This is a contracted position. You will be paid.
Yeah.
And
I'm here.
Yeah, it's the only reason. Right. So we will both be talking you through this process. I'll be offering insights on the creative process, and
I'll be asking for clarification for people who don't necessarily know certain words that you use.
yes,
Or, I'm the what character am I playing?
the novice, I suppose.
Sure, I'll do that.
Yeah, the talented amateur, the interested, the reader. You're basically the reader.
Oh, okay.
Although I think with ImagineFX there is a sort of implied contract with the reader that they already know a bit about digital image making, and your expertise is more in the field of archiving.
Yeah, my knowledge begins and ends with CMYK and RGB.
Right, yeah. Well, at least you got the letters in the right order.
I know.
That's good going. Right, well, so I should probably explain what's happening on screen. So I have scanned my rough pencil drawing into Photoshop, and now I'm just adding some perspective grids over the top so that I can do a nice tight line drawing. Now these are just perspective grids that I have prepared quite some time earlier. I used them for a lot of stuff in my comic book work, and you can find tutorials on YouTube about how to make perspective grids like these using the shape tool in Photoshop with the star function with 100 points. But I've found in using those in the past that that's not enough points, particularly for perspective for vanishing points that are quite far away. So I've sort of customized mine by making the star, doing the star thing, and then rotating it a few degrees, and then duplicating it and rotating it again. So I basically get a far more liney version. Thank you. And I just use the circle ellipse tool to crop out successive concentric circles so that it's not ever too liney at any point. That's open for debate, obviously. But yeah, I just have created a multi-function perspective tool. Fairly easy to do. It probably took me about an hour, and now I use those for everything. So
is there
time well spent.
Is there different names for the different overlays that you're using then?
Well, I'm using the multiply layers just so that they're basically see-through. It's the equivalent of kind of printing out on acetate, and then although yeah, it depends what color you're using. If it's a black and white multiply layer, then yes, it's like having it printed on acetate. If it's color, then that color will be sort of more or less transparent, depending on the how heavy a color is. If it's a very light color, it'll be very transparent. If it's quite a heavily pigmented color, it won't be as transparent. Also, I changed the colors there just so it's more easy to see the sort of y-axis and x-axis sort of vanishing points individually. I suppose they're both x-axis really, aren't they? Or y-axis. Which one's the y-axis then? Do you remember? Is that the vertical or the horizontal?
I'm the novice.
Oh, that's true.
We could skip that and just go on to explaining what's happening right now.
Okay,
We're
yes.
back using
Using a light board now.
One of your. Oh no, it's not the sailor cap again.
No. This is. I'm recording on my iPad now because I realised how absolutely putrid the quality of the webcam footage was, and this also meant that I could record my raw footage on another device so that I didn't overburden my computer, which has been struggling throughout this process.
So what you've done here is you've printed out the grid.
Yes, and the
image,
rough.
and so you've literally like physically overlaid it on your light board.
I've underlaid it, I suppose. Yeah, I've put it. I just taped it to a sheet of Bristol board. I'm using the light board to trace it basically, but tightening things up as I go. And this is basically me doing the bulk of the drawing at this stage. The rough sketch took maybe, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour or something like that, maybe a little bit longer. And then, but this process takes, many hours. That's why it's so sped up, but also why we won't be seeing the entirety of this part of the process, just because it would be way too much footage. But there's not a whole lot to explain, just using a ruler for straight lines and the grid underneath. I mean, once you've seen me do it for 5 minutes, you can pretty much, tell what's going on. The one thing that I am focusing on quite importantly at this stage, though, is making sure that the geometry of the kind of center of the pagoda makes sense, so that everything lines up. If you've seen any of those old Shinhanga prints, you'll notice that they've really paid attention to keeping that stuff quite tight and not just loosely drawing it. It's very, very carefully rendered, because this stuff's got to be cut out of wood painstakingly by expert craftspeople. So it needs to be pretty precise to justify all that labor. I think we'll probably be coming to the end of this portion soon and onto some more screen capture. But I suppose it's worth saying at this stage, I have put a shout out. I've selected a few trustworthy people not to share the image prior to the release of the article, and asked them if they have any questions about the process of making it. And Zan's going to very kindly have a little look to see if I've received any questions yet. No, none. Excellent. Right, well, that's fine. Hopefully those will come pouring in as the process continues.
I just have one question.
Compared
to, because you're focusing on one image, this is more like a kind of pin-up. Because usually when you're working on panels and your setup's a little bit different.
Correct.
So comparing to doing, obviously the style is very different to anything you've really done before. Would you say you continue to use the sort of skills that you would have used for pin-up images?
Yeah, it was basically up until the inking process, it was exactly the same as if I was making comic book art. Like, you can kind of see that here. I've darkened up the pencils, the first draft pencils, a little bit in Photoshop, just so that I can see them a bit more clearly when I print out a kind of blue line version of them to go over with even tighter pencils. That's the first kind of deviation from my normal process. Normally I wouldn't do 2 passes on the pencils like this. I would do a rough, I would do pencils, and then I'd go straight to inks. But with something like this, because those woodblock prints the line work is so painstakingly done, I felt I needed to have a another pass. And also, I wasn't very confident about some of the kind of anatomy on the trees and stuff. I wasn't used to drawing. Well, I'm not really used to drawing trees at all. I mostly work on sci-fi strips that take part in kind of in Mega City 1 and places like that.
No trees.
Yeah, no, exactly. Um, and so that was off my usual kind of comfort zone. And then it was specifically Japanese trees, which again is another kind of level of abstraction to what I'm used to. So this part of the process, going over it a second time with pencil, that's not something I usually do. It's something that Frank Whiteley does quite a lot, I believe. He prints his first draft pencils out in blue line and then goes over them more precisely with a very sharp pencil. And I felt that he's somebody whose style is actually quite similar in the line work to the sort of print that I was going for. So I thought it would be a good approach. So that's what I've done here. I've just printed it out. I'm very fortunate to have an A3 printer and scanner.
You're not going to give her a name shout out?
Well, I will. I will say I'm not sponsored by Epson, but I do use the Epson Workforce WF7610. It's basically the only one I could find that's an A3 printer and scanner that's anywhere near affordable. The scanner's not really good enough quality to scan my final artwork for comic book stuff, but it's certainly good enough to do all the interim stages, the pencils, printing it. It's very good for printing out blue line for inking over, because it gives a nice matte quality that you can ink over very, very easily. It's a very good piece of kit for my purposes. If you're an aspiring comic book artist or even a professional who hasn't discovered it yet, it does save me a lot of time and labor. But again, not sponsored. This is just a personal recommendation. I don't know what the ethics of the company is like. You can check that out for yourself.
My follow-up question was, because obviously this is, as I said before, kind of outside your wheelhouse, but you do like sort of dalliance towards different styles. And this, I think this
I like the prurient undertones there.
I feel like this is the first time I've seen you do anything in this particular style. So obviously you would have to change your kind of workflow a little bit when you're trying out new things. But you seemed pretty happy with the kind of final result. It's
close enough to what I usually do in terms of it's not like a photorealistic style or anything. It's still got the same components as drawing in a kind of comic book style. Here's the final type pencils scanned in. Again, I didn't include the whole process of doing those in the video just because it would have been hours and hours and hours and hours of raw capture that would have to be edited, but it wouldn't really have much in the way of educational purposes, because again, once you've seen me draw for a few minutes and seen how I do it, then there's not much more to be learned really, other than just keep doing that.
So what's happening here then?
So what's happening here is I'm getting rid of, once I've scanned it in, I'm getting rid of that background grid that was in colour. There is an artist called Paulo Rivera who has a couple of handy actions for sale, Photoshop actions on his website, if they're still there. One is for converting pencils to blue line. I use my own process for that, so that's not purchased. But one is for removing colour from a penciled or inked image, so you'll just get left with the black and white grayscale information. And another one is for converting inks into pure black and white. I'll be using that one later. Now, to answer...
Is that plugins for Photoshop?
They're not even plugins. There's actions is basically pre-programmed commands. You can record your own actions in Photoshop.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, he's just replicated his process for converting things to blue line or black and white, recorded it as an action, and then I think he sells them on his website for like $5 or $7 or something.
Very reasonable.
If it's something you use regularly, it's, you know, it might be worth it. The conversion to black and white one's very good. If you're looking to do the remove color process from your from, say, for example, scanned inks that have a blue line in the background, and you want to get rid of the blue line once you've scanned it in, you can just create an adjustment layer and mess about with the hue saturation options in image adjustments, and they'll allow you to manipulate the kind of visibility of each component color in the image. And if you go in and do all of them in turn and kind of dial them down, then you can do it that way. Obviously, the quicker way is to, you know, to buy an action that does it for you, but not everybody's got loads of money to spend on art materials.
I just noticed that the shot changed a little bit there. Is that because in the previous shot there was the little egg timer, which is obviously your prompt for stepping away?
My Pomodoro.
Yeah.
No, it was. I think it was just because I did this in sort of 2 takes, so that the raw files weren't too large. So I probably set up the camera a second time, or I had to get up and move the chair that I was using as a tripod. So there was no design to the camera angle changing, really. Again, this is not brilliantly crisp video. I apologize, but it's just to give you an idea. I'm mostly inking here with a brush, a Winsor & Newton Sable series. Sorry, Winsor & Newton 7 series Sable number 0. It's what I use for all my inking, really. And I'm using some technical pens. I'm trying to rule as few lines as possible, and those I do use a ruler for. I'm using either older technical pens or ones that I know give me a more varied line weight, because using brand new high quality Micron pens right out of the pack for something like this, it would betray the more modern tools used. Now, I know, because the subject matter is a bit futuristic anyway, nobody's going to think that this is actually a Shinhanga print from, you know, the early half of the 20th century. But I'm trying to keep the style. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to keep the visual style as consistent as possible. So I've scanned in my final inks here, done the remove color command on them, and then I'm now converting them into a pure black and white bitmap. Using that process I was talking about. The easiest way to do that, though, is just to go to image adjustment threshold, but you have to be careful. Make sure that your line art, whatever it is you're using the threshold command on, try and have it as high resolution as possible when you do that, because you will lose some detail to the threshold command, but the higher resolution the image is, the less detail you will lose. So even if you take an image you've scanned in at 300 dpi and convert it to 600 dpi before you threshold it, you will get a better image quality once you've done the threshold. Wasn't that interesting?
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say, people who are a bit more familiar with your work, I mean, after 7 odd years, I've picked up a few of your habits. How did you fight the urge to crosshatch everywhere?
That was difficult.
Yeah, can you imagine?
The fact that there are no inked shadows in this piece was like a kind of kryptonite to me. Not not like red kryptonite or anything.
Oh, no.
But a mild form of kryptonite.
Yeah.
The kind of kryptonite that just makes Superman feel a little bit insecure, like, and unwell.
Some dust in his cereal or something.
Something like that, yeah.
So we're zooming in and we're starting to do colors, and then flats is next, right?
Well, this is the flatting process. I've stuck on a quick gradient in the background. I've got my inks on a multiply layer, and I've shoved on a quick gradient just to give me a sort of basic palette. And then I've stuck on a quick texture as well on a soft light layer, and those just give me a sort of base. Almost like kind of priming a canvas with, you know, textured gesso or a kind of sepia or burnt umber wash before you go onto your underpainting. That's just so that I've got a kind of tonal touchstone that can kind of keep me in check for the rest and make sure I'm sticking to a fairly consistent palette. Also, it's quite satisfying once you've spent hours and hours and hours on your line work to get quite instant results with color, just so that you can go, yeah, it's working okay. And then you can go in and do the incredibly tedious flatting process. Now, I've sped the flatting up to about 16 times speed because anyone who's done flatting knows it's just the same thing over and over and over again. You're just selecting areas that are going to be individual colors, and it takes hours. It probably took about 2 hours, maybe 3 hours to do the flatting for this piece because there's so many different areas and none of them have perfectly straight lines pretty much. But also, because I was doing video capture as well, or screen capture, my computer kept crashing throughout the whole process.
Your poor computer that you've had for many years and has suffered at your hand, your digital hand,
Yeah,
a number
absolutely.
of times. I was just going to ask, how did you go about selecting your particular color scheme for this?
Well, that was very much reference based. I had to turn to, the old masters of the Shinhanga print. I will name check the ones I used in particular, but please forgive any bad pronunciation. I've only seen these names written down. I've never heard them said aloud. Kawase Hisui was a big influence, as was I believe Yoshida Hiroshi is his name. But there are a couple of pieces in particular that were useful for the reference. Do you want to just fill for a second
Well, I
while
think
I
that's
find
what
it?
you're doing digitally.
Aha, yes, I am.
I'm here for the puns.
Yeah, okay, so here's one. For the architecture of the pagoda, um, uh, Kazamatsu Shiro's Evening Rain Yanaka Pagoda, Tokyo, from 1932, was an influence bordering on plagiarism. In terms of the color palette and the rain, Tsuchiya Koitsu, the Miyajima in the Rain, 1941, that was a big influence, as was Kawase Hisui's 1924 Takatsu in Osaka. All these are woodcuts.
I was going to say these are legitimate source material then.
Oh yeah. No, there's tons of them and they're all great. I had to use a bunch for the trees as well, just like to get the look of those. I don't even know what the species of tree is.
You're not going to find them in Queen's Park though.
No, exactly. I used a lot of reference for this, and to be honest, if you the books that I used, there should be an image of them to accompany this article. If not, they are Visions of Japan, Kawase Hisui's masterpieces, and Shinhanga, the new print movement of Japan by Barry Till. All the images I used as reference come from those. And if you look through those books, you will see just how little creative input I had to the design of this piece.
Well, we got a little robot couple and
that's true. That's all mine.
Is it? I mean, I don't want to say robot doggy, but like.
It's just a generic robot pet. It looks a bit like a what were those things you used to get when we were at school that were like a little dome that you could program to like rove across the floor, like you could input commands. I'm not making this up.
BB-8.
No, it was like BB-8 though. It was just like it was like a Roomba, except it didn't serve any practical function other than just like
Oh, I didn't get
to
any
make small
electronic
children.
toys when I was a kid. I don't know what you're talking about.
Now, don't
It was
make it
all
sound like I had some
ball
kind of
and
private
stick.
education or anything. It was ball and stick.
Ball and stick, a hula hoop made out of piping, and and we just had to just be happy with that.
Yeah, yeah. I clearly had a marginally more privileged background. Basically, for about a week in primary school, we would get this plastic dome about the size of a like one of the big tubs of celebrations or something, and that would just sit on the ground. It was a little robot thing, and you would program in the directions for it to move.
Oh,
And it would,
yeah, I know what you're talking about. It wasn't a dome. It was a cream with orange and white buttons. I think there was a green button as well, and it was to teach kids about programming. So you could set a route, and it would like move the route, right?
yeah. So yeah, exactly. So suddenly you do remember.
Well, it's only because I have held one of them in my hand, and the packaging was so amazing, like very dated, like proper old school dated packaging.
Sounds like something I'd love.
Yeah. You're not getting one.
Oh,
You've got too many robots as it is.
I do.
So
How many people can say that?
was your surrounding robots, as they always are, major inspiration for the design of these wee guys?
No, actually, it was just whatever was simplest, to be honest. The figures are very small, so they had to kind of read as not 100% human right away. But the little pet was your idea.
Yeah.
Have a little pet, a little robot droid thing along with them, just to make it clear that they're sort of futuristic denizens of this area. Now, I apologize if we are going a little bit off topic, but we're still in the flatting stage of the video, so there's not really a lot to tell you. I'm using the lasso tool to select most of the areas, the ones particularly with the kind of wobbly lines. Occasionally I'll get lucky and an area will be completely enclosed by black outline, and I can use the magic wand tool for it, but more often than not I'm having to go in either with the regular lasso tool or the polyagonal lasso tool and select stuff manually. And every 5 minutes my computer's crashing as well.
So was that degrading from when you did the like up the contrast and got rid of the blue lines and stuff? Because when you were drawing it, like obviously the aim is to make sure the lines are kind of.
You know what? I really I
attached.
should have put more thought into making sure that the areas were enclosed, but at the same time, you kind of want a slightly rougher line for some of it
Yeah.
because those old prints, that would quite often happen. Lines wouldn't print perfectly, or they wouldn't be perfectly smooth on the wooden block. The grain of the wood would influence it and stuff. So, I didn't want it to look too clean either, and this was the price I paid for my hubris.
Well, do you want to explain just a little bit how the wood blocking process like works?
I would love to do that, and if I had a good understanding of that and had done a proper amount of research, I would be able to talk extensively about that. But I had to confine both my research and my kind of methods to what was possible in the time frame.
Yeah, you're a busy boy.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also, you've got one of the things about working as a freelancer is you do kind of have to manage your time quite carefully and decide how much time you can justify to any one project. And I don't know, I think the end result here ended up being maybe 85% as good as something I could have made if I'd researched it to death. And I think that's a pretty good level to have got to in the amount of time that without researching it too much, just looking at pictures and trying to figure out. Like, I did do a little bit of research on the process, but most of it was just I was doing it by eye.
So is this particular, because as I said, you've got a habit of sort of changing your workflow a little bit, or like deciding that after doing digital for years you're going to start painting. this particular workflow and style, is this something you'd like to do again? Because, like I said, the end product, I mean,
I
no
like it.
expert, I think it's lovely.
Well, thank you. I particularly like the look of the colors. I think if um, the next time I color my own particular interior comic work, I might try and use a similar um, approach to the colors. The line work, I do like my dark shadows and stuff, and my hatching.
How much longer would this have taken if you did all your hatching?
Um, it might have been quicker in some ways, because there wouldn't have been as many areas of color. There'd just be a fair bit of it would just be black. And I probably wouldn't need to lean on texture quite as heavily as I have here. I don't know. It probably would have taken about the same amount of time. The thing that is the most time consuming is just the coverage, getting all the lines on the paper to delineate the stuff. Things like shading and hatching and that, they can be time consuming, but you can do them a bit more mechanically. Um, yeah, we're now into uh, gradients and things. We've passed the flattening stage. We're now
We made it.
we did. Um, so now we're looking at getting the right color palette. We don't have to worry about separating each level of color. We've now duplicated our flats layer onto another layer, which we can play about with as much as we like, knowing that we can use the magic wand tool to select any area of color that we've previously delineated on our flats layer. And at the moment, it's sort of going okay. I quite like the colors. They're maybe they're not as deep as I would like at this stage, but I know I'm going to be adding another texture for the darker colors, particularly on that pagoda structure. That's not really been affected very much by the texture layer that I added earlier. Incidentally, the texture layers I'm using, one of them's homemade, that one's still to come, and that was made just by scanning some packing material, just like polystyrene packing material that I had lying around the house, because it looked a bit like kind of like a rough wood grain. And the other texture I'm using is one, it's just a high quality texture image I found on Google Images, but I've manipulated it a little bit to boost the contrast. But yeah, I think that's all right. I think it's kind of kosher to just swipe textures off the internet and use them on your pieces, as long as you're not passing off somebody's work as entirely your own.
Yeah, I think there's a rule about like if it's changed by a certain amount. But
Yeah, I feel like it's not. I don't think the person who created that texture would be looking at this image and going, they've just ripped me off.
maybe give them a shout out on Twitter.
I've no idea who they are.
Other than the color scheme, is
Mhm.
something that you think you might use again? Is
Yes.
there any particular, and obviously on the digital side, techniques or tricks that you hadn't really used before for this specific piece that you think you may use again?
Well, yes, one in particular, which was what I'm doing now. The outlines of certain areas don't, like, not every area suits a solid black outline, and particularly with that woodblock printmaking style, you'll notice that the areas of light, like the moon and stuff like this, or reflections of light in water, they generally don't have outlines, and they seem to be printed last, or one of the last layers that's printed, so that they've got a good bold color.
Yeah.
That's pretty clean. And so to achieve a similar effect, rather than just getting rid of the outlines around those areas, like, going onto my line art layer and just erasing it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that, because then you would see the sort of slightly more digital looking edge of the selection that I made, and it'd be a little bit too clean. So I just recolored the line art with the paint bucket tool, So I used the Magic Wand tool to select the line art, then used the lasso tool to isolate the particular area that I wanted to change. Then I expand. This is quite useful tip, I guess. I went to select, modify, expand, and I expanded the line by 2 pixels, just so that it would actually there wouldn't be like a little area in between the color and the line that was sort of empty.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just used the paint bucket tool to recolor the line work to be something close to the color of the the moon or whatever area it was I was selecting. Didn't have to be exact, because sometimes during the printing process the edges of an area of color will be slightly discolored. But yeah, I thought it worked quite well. You see, this is why we quite often go off and talk about other things, because talking about the process is sometimes quite dull.
I mean, that's something you've learned, and I'm sure it's that's what these things are for. It's a learning process. It's handing off knowledge that you felt was useful and you might use again.
Yeah, with that packing texture, I did modify it a little bit by adding another layer on top of it with a white to transparent gradient, and then used it and put that on a dissolve layer. Now that only works, like when you zoom in really close, you can see that looks very artificial as a texture. But luckily, you have to zoom in quite a lot, to the point where I printed this image out on A3 and I couldn't see any evidence of that. It just looked like a fairly natural texture. When you really, really zoom in close on the original Photoshop file, it does look a bit dodgy. But that's fine. It was all about creating something for the magazine. It didn't have to look good under a microscope on the original Photoshop file.
Is there a when I'm in the living room and you're in the studio working away? What other things are you chucking in the scanner? What other things have you scanned for texture?
This is one of the first times that I've ever actually scanned my own texture, just because I wasn't sure I had anything in the archives that was going to emulate a woodblock. Also, I kind of wanted to use my own textures as much as possible, because I don't really like swiping other people's stuff off the internet, even if it's just to use as a texture overlay. I prefer to kind of home bake as much as possible, so that I can so I'm not, rattling anybody's cage or stepping on anybody's feet, or whatever analogy is appropriate.
You're building on your skill set as well.
Exactly, and that means I might discover something during that process. I might find a texture I really like. The intention was originally to have a whole bunch of textures for the different blocks that would have been in the original wood blocking process. But to be honest, once I had my first texture on for the sky and liked it, and I ended up keeping that for a lot. So I only ended up using 2 different textures really for the whole thing.
So this is you taking away the black lining again?
Yeah, although like I say, it's more modifying the black line to be a different color, just so that I keep that kind of less than perfect edge around everything. This is quite a good view of it now. So enjoy.
It's nice to see your labeling all your layers, which is super basic.
Super yeah. Well, I mean, I don't label all of them. There's a few untitles in there, I think, but and yeah, layer 3 copy and stuff. But I try and name the important ones. I am also saving very frequently during this process, because of the amount of crashes I've had while screen recording, so that I don't lose too much progress. That happened a bunch of times and it was very annoying. So save your work regularly. Particularly, Photoshop is one of those programs that just eats up your memory and RAM and everything, and it will just dump massive temporary files in your computer. Like anytime you go into your temporary files, you can see maybe anywhere between like a 2 and 10 gigabyte file Photoshop's just decided to plonk there. And it can be frustrating for your computer and yourself. But yeah, just try and... I've moved my temporary files onto another drive just because it kept stressing out my hard drive too much.
Another handy hint.
Another handy hint, yeah. Speaking of you being in the other room and me being in the studio, what was it like living with me during the process of creating this piece, would you say?
I mean...
Fraught?
Absolutely fine, apart from, obviously, your poor wee tower having enough and throwing a strop.
By which she means my CPU tower, not the pagoda.
No, the tower did not decide to have a strop. But yeah, the computer... but like I said, you've been pretty busy with work, and that obviously... it's a team effort. It's you and your tower and your drawing boards and all the tools that you use. So when one decides that it needs a mental health day, you just have to listen to it. You have to give it an extra fan. Or
that one being
memory.
Me. Oh, right, yeah.
No, I wasn't discussing your mental health day. Talking about the
Hey, look, we all need mental health days.
Yeah, super important. You need to. That's why I mentioned your little little egg timer.
Yeah.
Like the stepping away from the computer. Like, I know how easy it is from video editing to just get totally zoned in and like just forget that you've not eaten or been to the bathroom until you stand up and you're like, oh no,
it's a good idea to do those things.
Yeah. So having the little 20-minute or 25-minute timer thing does make a difference. So you've got to look after all the tools that you use when you're being creative, and that includes not sitting on your bum continuously. So what's happening here?
Right. Well, at this point, I believe I have settled on my textures for the most part. I think I'm maybe going to add a little bit more texture to the walkway area. No, I think I might have actually just completely done that now. So I'm taking away the outlines on the reflections in the water. That's something I'm focusing on. And I'm trying to get my gradients as nice as possible. And right now there I'm adding to the line art, I am modifying it so that it's a little bit pink towards the upper left corner to suggest the setting sun. You can see it most clearly on the spire, the antenna thing at the top of the pagoda. Now, we are coming up to kind of the final 10-15 minutes of this tutorial, so we will consult the questions again, if there are any questions.
Nope.
None. Excellent.
This is what happens when you give people 5 minutes notice when people enjoy their weekends. Sorry about the creaking chair there.
That's all right. Yeah, I should have given people more notice, I suppose. I just didn't think. Well, I was originally going to put a shout out on Twitter. That's what I used to do. Put a shout out on Twitter for Q&A. But obviously, I can't share the image.
Yeah, this is exclusive content for you guys.
Well, I mean, by the time they're listening to this, the magazine will be out.
Yeah.
So I will have put the image up on Twitter, probably.
But it's exclusive for the magazine readers at present.
Oh,
Future
yeah.
magazine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Consider yourself an elite few.
Not that few.
Not only who've bought ImagineFX, but who have bothered to check out the additional tutorial content. Believe me, I was one of you. Represent. When I was starting out, I would savor those tutorials. Most of them didn't have the presence of mind to do a commentary, which is fine, but it's a resource that I feel enhances the video.
I feel like that's up to the listeners to judge if it enhances the video.
I'm not saying this one does.
Oh, okay.
I just mean a commentary can enhance. Because, stuff can fly by so quickly, in this life. And in a video that's operating at between 4 to 16 times the actual speed that you created the piece at. So there are times where you need someone to go, whoa, slow down, and explain the process.
Yeah, why not take a tranquil walk across some water near a pagoda and enjoy the moment?
Yeah, that's if there is a message or a moral to this picture, that would probably be it. Yeah. Oh yeah. If you're near a retro-futuristic pagoda,
if you've got one handy,
then by all means avail yourself of its proximity.
Oh, I didn't realise that the ballfoot robot had like a little sort of wrap round, a wee bit more traditional clothing on there.
Again, not very well researched. I figure it's an alternate future reality, so who knows what kind of dress sense and robots they'll have.
No, that's styling.
No need to do any research, Tom. You just take it easy.
That is styling. I feel like basically your main aim for the start of this was to create a futuristic representation of work that is pre-established, and under my sort of non-expert eyes, it looks pretty good.
Well, thank you.
You did
rave reviews.
You did do the thing that you often do. This is like
whoa, what's that?
Insider knowledge.
What do I often do?
When Tom stretches.
Did I introduce myself at the start of this video? By the way, do they know who Tom is?
Tom's the one that's.
I'm Tom Foster, by the way. Good to meet you.
He has a habit of when he's trying something new, he's generally a little bit concerned going into it that it might go horribly wrong. And when it doesn't go horribly wrong, based on many years of skills that he has built up, he comes in and he goes, I think this might be the best work I've ever done.
Well, luckily I have the sort of the blind arrogance to just go ahead and do it, and then whether or not that pans out. Like, sometimes I will try something and realise I'm woefully underqualified.
There was a painting moment.
Oh, God, yeah, there's been a lot of painting moments when I first ventured into, oil paints, gouache, acrylics. They've all crippled me at various points.
But you got to start somewhere, that's the thing.
It's true. I've had some pretty underwhelming results, though, and some very...
mixed reviews?
Yeah, mixed reviews from editors on the quality of my painted pieces.
But again, you have to start somewhere.
I do.
And things like ImagineFX magazine is great for people who are leaning towards digital stuff.
Yes.
And obviously, in this particular tutorial, it was a mix of digital and practical.
Well, I guess that was the message I wanted to get across with this piece, which is that, doing digital art, I think there is a preconception that digital artwork has a certain look to it. That the digital painted look.
Shiny 90s comics.
No, well, the 90s colouring, yes, that as well, but also the sort of the paintings with lots of transparency layers and stuff that don't necessarily have a particularly textured feel to them. Not everybody likes that look. Some people do, and that's great as well. But it is possible to use traditional materials and digital materials in concert to achieve a unified look, and it's also possible to use digital materials to create something that is not entirely in line with what people often think of when they think of digital art. So digital art can be whatever you want it to be, and it often is just a way of replicating processes that would be far too time-consuming or require specialist knowledge or resources to create like this, where I don't have woodblock engraving tools. I don't know anything about the printing process involved, and yet I was able to cobble together a fairly passable approximation.
Based on research in the images
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you
that's
referenced earlier.
exactly. That's the important thing.
You're
Is
a big fan of reference.
Yeah, good reference, bit of research, training your eye to see what makes a Shinhanga print look like a Shinhanga print, or whatever type of style you're trying to emulate, and having good core drawing and image making skills. That can, count for a lot. And I think the sort of decent quality of the end product here is a good testament to that.
So when you're replicating anything, what are like the main? Because obviously you've stated that you didn't really go into the research of the sort of mechanics behind making wood blocks. It was all reference images that you based it around. So color scheme would be one thing.
Yeah, the colors I was very dependent on, not just the Shinhanga prints, but like lots of like even more contemporary pieces that are like Studio Ghibli movies. That the things like My Neighbor Totoro. That's what it's called, isn't it? That's got quite a sort of a similar color palette to this, or at least the box art does. I haven't watched the movie in a while.
But again, like was stated before, like the line work is very different to what you usually do as well. So like that obviously was to reference that style.
Yeah, I mean, I only had to modify it slightly. It was just to be a little bit less mechanical looking and a little bit more kind of lean into the handmade side of things. And it was. It's tough to live up to the absolute masters of the genre.
Of course, they know what they're doing.
Well, exactly. They know what they're doing. But I figured the priority with this was to make it, the style anyway, look as authentic as possible. And it didn't have to be the greatest master doing it. It could be a much lesser, a far more mediocre Shinhanga print designer and woodblock engraver carrying it out, as long as it looked fairly convincingly of the time in the way the image is put together. That was my main goal. So I was leaning into a sort of authentic look over it being the most amazingly brilliantly rendered piece
If I
possible.
remember rightly, obviously there's still a little bit left to go.
Yeah, not long now.
There's a kind of line
1 minute 45
that you add to make it look a bit more. As I'm presuming it's to make it look like there's the grain in the wood. The sort of lines that you have.
What lines?
Oh,
you mean the rain that's coming?
Yeah.
There's rain. There's a storm coming, Zan.
Ah.
I added after I finished. I couldn't decide for the whole process whether I wanted to actually have rain drawn on it or just imply it with the umbrella and the little ripples in the water. Because a lot of the time in these types of prints, they won't actually have the rain in the image. They'll just rely on the texture of the wood grain maybe to communicate a sense of rainfall. But I didn't really have that so much, and I just wanted to try it out. So I just took a ruler and a sort of scrappy mechanical pen or fine liner type pen. Very quickly scored some lines on paper, scanned them in, put them in I guess a linear burn layer rather than a multiply layer. I think I do a couple of passes on that so that I can have, for this area, so that there's a few lighter lines cutting across the shape of the pagoda. I felt there was too much in the way of unbroken kind of black areas there, or very dark areas, and they needed to have a little bit of detail breaking them up. But yeah, I think the rain worked quite well, so I kept it in.
Yeah, it very much adds to the kind of whole feel.
Well, thank you. That's us coming up for the end now. feel free to rewatch this if you can take it. But
You can always mute it,
yeah, thank you for joining us, and good night.